The street was alive with chaos, the kind that drowns out every personal thought with its ceaseless noise. Honking cars impatiently pushed their way through traffic, vendors called out prices for fresh fruit, and somewhere in the distance, a bus engine roared as it struggled up a hill. In the middle of it all, a scruffy brown stray dog trotted along the cracked pavement, weaving between legs and bicycles with the agility of someone who had been doing this for years. His ribs were faintly visible beneath his dirty fur, his paws calloused from endless wandering. He wasn't just wandering aimlessly today, though. Something in the air had caught his attention, a faint scent, a memory wrapped in it. He slowed, nose twitching, ears flicking back and forth as he followed it. The smell wasn't food, wasn't danger, it was something else. Something old. And then he saw him. Across the street, in the blur of movement, stood a man holding a small grocery bag in one hand. He wasn't looking around. He seemed lost in thought, walking at a steady, distracted pace. But to the dog, that man might as well have been the only person in the world at that moment. His eyes, those same tired yet kind eyes, were burned into the dog's memory from years ago. The dog stopped dead in his tracks. The noise of the street dulled in his ears, replaced by the echo of another time, a day when the sky was dark and heavy with rain, and water surged through the gutters like a raging river. Back then, he had been smaller, weaker, his fur soaked through, shivering violently in a ditch that had begun to flood. He had been too exhausted to bark, too weak to move. And then, this man had appeared. Kneeling in the mud without hesitation, he had scooped the tiny, freezing animal into his arms, tucking him inside his coat. The warmth, the steady heartbeat against his ear, the soft voice murmuring, "It's okay, you're safe now," had burned themselves into the dog's very soul. He had never forgotten. Now, years later, here the man was, same eyes, same way of walking, though his hair had more gray strands and his shoulders seemed to carry a heavier weight. The dog's tail began to wag slowly, almost cautiously, as if afraid that moving too fast might make the vision disappear. Then his tail picked up speed, wagging hard enough to sway his whole body. His paws shifted forward on instinct, heart pounding in excitement. The man still hadn't noticed him. The stray glanced left and right, gauging the traffic. Cars zipped by in bursts, and motorbikes darted between them. For most animals, crossing this road was dangerous, maybe even deadly. But the pull of recognition was stronger than any sense of self-preservation. He darted forward, weaving through tires, the blare of horns ringing in his ears. People cursed, but he kept running, his eyes locked on that familiar figure. When he reached the other side, the man finally looked up. At first, his expression was simply puzzled, a stranger seeing a random dog run toward him. But the dog didn't stop. His paws skidded on the dusty pavement as he came to a halt just a breath away, chest heaving. And then their eyes met. It was subtle, just a flicker, but something changed in the man's face. His gaze shifted from confusion to focus, his brows drawing together as he studied the dog more closely. The dog's ears twitched, and he took a small step forward. He could feel the man's attention settle on his face, and then linger on his right ear. The scar was still there, a thin, pale line that cut across the fur, the same one from the stormy night when a piece of floating debris had nicked him. The man's breath caught. "Buddy, is that you?" the man murmured, his voice low and disbelieving. The dog let out a soft, high-pitched whine, a sound he hadn't made in years. The man dropped to a crouch, setting his grocery bag gently on the ground, and opened his arms. That was all the invitation the dog needed. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, pressing his head into the man's chest. The warmth was still there. The heartbeat was still steady. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the dog felt truly safe. The man's hands moved through his matted fur, gentle but trembling slightly. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. There was a roughness in his tone, as if he was swallowing down something heavier than the words themselves. Passers-by slowed to glance at the unusual reunion, some smiling faintly, others barely noticing before moving on. The dog didn't care about the people. All that mattered was that his savior was here, flesh and blood, real. His tail thumped against the man's leg, the sound steady and joyful. He tried to lick the man's face, and the man laughed softly, a sound tinged with disbelief. "You remembered me," he said. But the moment didn't stay theirs alone. From somewhere to their left, a sharp, irritated voice cut through the air. "Hey, get away from that dog." The man looked up, startled, still keeping a protective arm around the dog. The voice grew closer, heavier footsteps pounding against the pavement. The dog's tail stilled, his body tensing. The moment of perfect reunion was over, and something new was about to crash into it. The voice was sharp, cutting through the noise of the street like a knife. "Hey, get away from that dog." The man froze, one hand still buried in the dog's fur, the other resting instinctively on his back as if shielding him. The dog stiffened, his tail stopping mid-wag, ears flattening against his head. Both of them turned toward the sound. A large figure was striding toward them, moving with the swagger of someone used to being obeyed. He wore a scuffed black leather jacket and heavy boots that clapped against the pavement. His hair was slicked back, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes were locked on the dog with something that wasn't kindness. The man in the jacket didn't slow down. He reached out without a word, grabbing the loose skin at the back of the dog's neck. The dog yelped in surprise and pain, struggling against the sudden grip. The man with the grocery bag reacted instantly, tightening his hold on the dog's front and pulling him away from the stranger's reach. "What do you think you're doing?" the rescuer demanded, his voice low but edged with steel. The stranger narrowed his eyes. "What am I doing? I'm catching him. This mutt's been running wild all over the place, chasing kids, knocking over market stalls, stealing food. I've been trying to catch him for days." The rescuer's eyes flicked down to the dog, who was now pressed tightly against his leg, shaking slightly but not pulling away. He looked back up at the stranger. "He's not yours." The man in the leather jacket gave a short, humorless laugh. "Not mine. Who do you think's been feeding him scraps so he doesn't starve? I've been keeping track of him. Now I'm gonna take him somewhere he'll be of use." There was something in his tone, something calculated, that made the rescuer's stomach knot. "Of use," he repeated, his voice sharp. The stranger shrugged, as if it were obvious. "Guard dog. Fighting dog. Dogs like this can make you money if you know what you're doing." The rescuer felt his blood pressure spike. Years ago, he'd risked wading waist-deep into icy floodwater to save this animal from drowning. He had carried him home, dried him off, fed him, and nursed him back to health before the dog eventually wandered off on his own. To hear someone talk about turning him into a tool for violence lit a fire deep in his chest. "You're not taking him," he said flatly. The man in the jacket smirked, clearly amused by the resistance. "You gonna stop me? Finders keepers, pal. You just happened to run into him, but I've been tracking him for a while. He's coming with me." Around them, a small crowd was beginning to gather. Street vendors, shoppers, and curious passers-by slowed to watch the brewing confrontation. Some whispered to each other, some pulled out their phones, but most just stood back, sensing that tempers were about to boil over. The dog's eyes darted between the two men, his breathing fast. His body was tense, ready to bolt, but he didn't move, almost as if he was waiting for the rescuer to make the call. The man in the jacket reached into his back pocket and pulled out a coiled rope. The rescuer's stomach turned cold. This wasn't some harmless leash, this was a crude restraint, frayed and stiff from use. He had no doubt that once the rope was on the dog, his life would change for the worse in ways the animal couldn't possibly imagine. The rescuer stepped forward, placing himself fully between the stranger and the dog. "I'm telling you for the last time, you're not taking him." The man in the jacket's smirk faded, replaced by something darker. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think this mud even remembers you? Dogs don't care who saved them, they care who feeds them today." But the rescuer knew that wasn't true. The way the dog had run across the road, the recognition in his eyes, the way he had pressed his head against him, it was proof enough that some bonds don't fade with time. The stranger took another step forward. "Move, or I'll make you move." The rescuer could feel the tension in the air thickening, the crowd's murmurs growing louder. Every muscle in his body screamed to stand his ground. You want him, you'll have to go through me. For a moment, it looked like the stranger might take the challenge. His jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the rope. But before anything could happen, the dog suddenly let out a sharp bark. Both men turned to look at him. His body language had changed. He was no longer cowering. He was alert, ears forward, eyes locked on something beyond them. He let out another bark, louder this time, and twisted free from the rescuer's protective hold. The rescuer's hand shot out, trying to grab him, but the dog was already moving, darting past both men, weaving through the legs of onlookers. For a split second, panic shot through the rescuer's mind. Had the dog bolted out of fear? Was he running away from the trouble? Then he realized, the dog wasn't running away from something. He was running towards something. If you want, I can now expand part 3 in the same vivid, cinematic way so that the shocking twist lands with maximum emotional and visual impact. That way, the whole story will feel like a movie playing in your head. Would you like me to do that? The dog moved like lightning, a brown streak weaving through the shifting crowd. People stepped back in surprise, some shouting, others trying to avoid tripping over him. The rescuer's heart leapt into his throat as he pushed through the bystanders, his eyes locked on the dog's darting form. He didn't know what had startled him or where he was headed, but there was an unmistakable urgency in the animal's movements. Every bound was purposeful. The man in the leather jacket swore under his breath and started after him too, shoving people aside with rough pushes. Come back here, you mangy thing. He barked, the rope still clenched in his fist. The rescuer ignored him. His focus was on the dog, who was now threading his way toward the far end of the street. Then, without warning, the dog swerved sharply to the right, heading straight toward the edge of the sidewalk where a small boy, no older than 6, stood clutching a red balloon. The boy's mother was kneeling by a vendor stall, rummaging through her bag, her back turned to him. In that split second, the rescuer's stomach dropped. Beyond the boy, barreling down the narrow side street at dangerous speed, was a motorbike. The rider was leaning forward, eyes fixed ahead, weaving recklessly between pedestrians. He was going too fast for this crowded area, and the boy was standing just a few steps from the curb, directly in the rider's path. The crowd hadn't noticed yet. No one had time to shout a warning. The dog did. With a final burst of speed, he lunged at the boy, jaws clamping gently but firmly onto the sleeve of his puffy coat. The force of his pull sent the boy stumbling backward, away from the edge, just as the motorbike screamed past, missing him by mere inches. The wind from its passing whipped the balloon string out of the boy's hand, sending the bright red orb soaring into the sky. Gasps and shouts erupted all around. The boy's mother spun around, eyes wide, and in one motion she scooped her son into her arms, holding him so tightly he let out a surprised cry. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" she kept repeating, her voice trembling as she kissed the top of his head. The rescuer finally reached them, breathless, his chest heaving. He glanced from the mother to the boy, then to the dog, who stood panting but alert, tail slightly raised, as if ready for more danger. There was no aggression in his stance, only a watchful protectiveness. The man in the leather jacket slowed his pace as he approached, his expression no longer smug but uneasy. The crowd's mood had shifted. Whispers spread quickly. "That dog saved the kid. Did you see that? Pulled him back just in time. He's a hero." The mother turned to the rescuer. "Is this your dog?" she asked, her voice still shaking. The rescuer hesitated for only a moment before answering firmly, "Yes. He is now." The leather-jacketed man opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, but the look on the mother's face, and the low murmur of agreement from the crowd, silenced him. This was no troublemaking stray. This was a lifesaver. To try and take him now would make him the villain in every witness's eyes. His jaw worked as if chewing down words he couldn't say. Without another glance at the dog, he turned away, shoving the rope back into his pocket, and melted into the dispersing crowd. The rescuer crouched down, meeting the dog's eyes. The dog's tail wagged once, twice, but there was something calm in his gaze, almost as if he understood exactly what had just happened and was content with it. The rescuer smiled faintly and reached out to ruffle his fur. "Looks like you're still saving lives, huh?" he murmured, the words carrying more weight than he expected. The mother bent down as well, her son clinging shyly to her neck. "Thank you," she said to the dog, as though he could understand. Maybe he could. His ears flicked, and he gave a small, happy huff of breath. Around them, people were already moving on, the rhythm of the street resuming as though nothing had happened. But for the rescuer, everything had changed. A few minutes ago, he'd been walking home with groceries, his mind on nothing in particular. Now, he was kneeling on a busy street, looking into the eyes of a dog he'd once pulled from death's grip, a dog who had just repaid that act in the most unexpected way possible. The dog stepped forward, leaning his weight into the rescuer's legs. There was no hesitation in him now, no wandering gaze, no restless shifting. It was as if, in that moment, he had decided he was home. The rescuer stood, looping an arm gently around the dog's shoulders, and looked down the road toward where he lived. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home, buddy." They walked side by side, the dog's head held high, his tail swinging in an easy rhythm. The noise of the city began to fade behind them, replaced by the simple sound of footsteps and paws moving together. The rescuer knew the road ahead might not be easy. Dogs like this didn't always adapt overnight, and trust took time to rebuild. But as the dog glanced up at him, eyes bright and unafraid, he knew they had all the time they needed. Because some bonds weren't just made once. Some bonds were forged twice, once in rescue, and once in reunion. And when that happened, there was no breaking them.